This is the sixth Tuesday we talk about emotions. I walked past the mountain laurels and the Japanese maple up the blue stone steps of Maury's house. The white rain gutter hung like a lid over the doorway. I rang the bell and was greeted not by Connie but by Maury's wife, Charlotte, a beautiful gray haired woman who spoke in a lighting voice. She was not often home when I came by, but she continued working at MIT, as Maury wished, and I was surprised this morning to see her. Maury's having a bit of a hard time today, she said. She stared over my shoulder for a moment, then moved toward the kitchen. I'm sorry, I said. No, no, he'll be happy to see you, she said quickly. I'm sure. She stopped in the middle of her sentence, turned her head slightly, listening for something. Then she continued, I'm sure he'll feel better when he knows you're here. I lifted up the bags from the market, my normal food supply, I said jokingly, and she seemed to smile and fret at the same time. There's already so much food he hasn't eaten any from last time. This took me by surprise. He hasn't eaten any food, I asked. She opened the refrigerator and I saw familiar containers of chicken salad, vermicelli, vegetables stuffed squash, all things I'd brought for Maury. She opened the freezer and there was even more. Maury can't eat most of this food. It's too hard for him to swallow. He has to eat soft things and liquid drinks now. But he never said anything, I said. Charlotte smiled. He doesn't want to hurt your feelings. It wouldn't have hurt my feelings. I just wanted to help in some way. I mean, I just wanted to bring him something. You are bringing him something, she said. He looks forward to your visits. He talks about having to do this project with you, how he has to concentrate and put the time aside. I think it's giving him a good sense of purpose. Again, she gave him the fairway look, the tuning in. Again, she gave that faraway look, the tuning in something somewhere else. I also knew Maury's nights were becoming difficult, that he didn't sleep through them, and that meant Charlotte often did not sleep through them either. Sometimes Maury would lie awake, coughing for hours. It would take that long to get the phlegm from his throat. There were healthcare workers now staying through the night, and all those visitors during the day, former students, fellow professors, meditation teachers, tramping in and out of the house. On some days, Maury had a half a dozen visitors, and they were often there when Charlotte returned from work. She handled it with patience, even though all the outsiders were soaking up her precious minutes with Maury. A sense of purpose, she continued. Yes, that's good, you know. I hope so, I said. I helped put the food inside the refrigerator. The kitchen counter had all kinds of notes, messages, information, medical instructions. The table held more pill bottles than I'd ever seen. Celestone for his asthma, Ativan to help him sleep, naproxen for pain, along with powdered milk, mix, and laxatives. From down the hall, we heard a sort of sound of an open door. Maybe he's available now. Let me check. Charlotte glanced again at the food, and I felt suddenly ashamed. All these reminders of things Maury could never enjoy. The small horrors of his illness were growing, and when I finally sat down with Maury, he was coughing more than usual, a dry, dusty cough that shook his chest and made his head jerk forward. After one violent surge, he stopped, closed his eyes, and took a breath. I sat quietly because I thought he was recovering from his exertion. Is the tape on? He said suddenly, his eyes still closed. Yes, yes, I quickly said, pressing down the play button to record. What I'm doing now, he continued, his eyes still closed, is detaching myself from the experience. Detaching yourself? Yes, detaching myself. And this is important, not just for someone like me who is dying, but for someone like you who's perfectly healthy. Learn to detach. He opened his eyes and he exhaled. You know what the Buddhists say, don't cling to things because everything is impermanent. But wait, I said, aren't you always talking about experiencing life, all the good emotions, all the bad ones? Yes. Well, how can I do that if you're attached? Ah, you're thinking, Mitch. But detachment doesn't mean that you don't let the experience penetrate you. On the contrary, you let it penetrate you fully. That's how you are able to leave it. I'm lost. Take any emotion, love for a woman, or grief for a loved one, or what I'm going through, fear and pain from a deadly illness. If you hold back the emotions, if you can't allow yourself to go all the way through them, you can never get to being detached. You're too busy being afraid. You're afraid of the pain. You're afraid of the grief. You're afraid of the vulnerability that loving entails. But by throwing yourself into these emotions, by allowing yourself to dive in all the way, over your head even, you experience them fully and completely. You know what pain is. You know what love is. You know what grief is. And only then can you say, all right, I've experienced the emotion. I recognize that emotion, and now I need to detach from the emotion for a moment. Maury stopped and looked over at me, perhaps to make sure I was getting it right. I know you think that this is just about dying, he said, but it's like I keep telling you, when you learn how to die, you learn how to live. Maury talked about his most fearful moments when he felt his chest locked in heaving surges or when he wasn't sure when his next breath would come from. These were horrifying times, he said, and his first emotions were horror, fear, and anxiety. But once he recognized how to feel those emotions, their texture, their moisture, the shiver down his back, and the quick flash of heat that crosses your brain, then he was able to say, okay, this is fear. Step away from it. Step away. I thought about how often we needed this in everyday life, how we feel lonely, sometimes to the point of tears, but we don't let those tears come because we're not supposed to cry. Or how we feel a surge for love for a partner, but we don't say anything because we're frozen in the fear of what those words might do to the relationship. Maury's approach was exactly the opposite. Turn on the faucet. Wash yourself with emotion. It won't hurt you, it will actually help you. If you let the fear inside, if you pull it on it like a familiar shirt, then you can say to yourself, all right, it's just fear. I don't have to let it control me. I see it for what it is. Same for the loneliness. You let go, let the tears flow, feel it completely, but eventually be able to say, all right, that was my moment with loneliness. I'm not afraid of feeling lonely. But now I'm going to put the loneliness aside and know that there are other emotions in the world, and I'm going to experience them as well. Detached, Maurice said again. He closed his eyes and then coughed. Then he coughed again. Then he suddenly coughed again, more loudly. I'm so sorry. Suddenly, he was half choking, the congestion in his lungs seemingly teasing him, jumping halfway up and then dropping back down, stilling his breath. He was gagging, then hacking violently, and he shook his hands in front of him. With his eyes closed, shaking his hands, he appeared almost possessed. And I felt my forehead break into a sweat. I instinctively pulled him forward and slapped him on the back of his shoulders, and he pushed a tissue to his mouth and spit out a wad of phlegm. The coughing stopped, and Maury dropped back into the foam pillows and sucked in air. You okay? You all right? I said, trying to hide my fear. I'm okay, Maury whispered, raising a shaky finger. Just wait a minute. We sat there quietly until his breath returned to normal, and I felt the perspiration on my scalp. He asked me to close the window, that the breeze was making him cold. I didn't mention that it was 80 degrees outside. Finally, in a whisper, he said, I know how I want to die. I waited in silence. I want to die serenely, peacefully, not just let it happen, or not like what just happened. And this is where detachment comes from. If I die in the middle of a coughing spell like I just have, I need to be able to detach from that horror. I need to say, this is my moment. I don't need to leave the world in a state of fright. I want to know what's happening and accept it and get to a peaceful place and let it go. Do you understand? I nodded. Don't let it don't let go yet, I added quickly. Maury forced a smile. No, not yet. We still have plenty of work to do. Here's the flashback. Do you believe in reincarnation? I asked. Perhaps. What would you come back as? If I had a choice, a gazelle. A gazelle? Yes, so graceful, so fast. A gazelle. Maury smiles at me. You think that's strange? I study his shrunken frame, the loose clothes, the socks wrapped feet that rest stiffly on foam rubber cushions, unable to move, like a prisoner in leg irons. I picture Gazelle racing across the desert. No, I say, I don't think it's strange at all.